Hello everyone, and welcome to my Opus 12 wrap-up. So since Opus 10, after a new Opus an Opus passes and we get a new Opus that comes in, Opus 13 is fully released now on the online, there's still some shipping delays, but I always like to do a recap of the previous Opus and kind of find out what were the cards that I maybe thought were great and then they maybe weren't so great, or maybe ones I underestimated and then they ended up being great. And there's somebody else special that kind of does that as well, and he always has his pre-Opus thoughts, and that is Mr. Cool himself, Alex Hancox. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Travis. Happy to be back on the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. You were a very big star the first time, so we got to get you back on. So, how long have you been doing your kind of pre-Opus review thoughts that you usually do?
I think the first one, it was either 5 or 6. I remember doing 6 very specifically because I remember back then I used to do it out of 10, right? And I gave Sid 2 that 4-drop win back a 1 out of 10. So I thought no one's ever going to play this to search evokers out, and then I gave it a whirl in a like a FF2 Rebels deck, and it wasn't anything super game breaking, but I was like, wow, this card's actually really cool. If you draw it in your opening hand every game, it's amazing. And then I was like, wow, I gave this a 1 out of 10. What an idiot! And then ever since then, I kind of kept doing it as a kind of test of myself to see what I kind of underrate and overrate as the set goes on. And since Sid 2, whenever I give a card like less than 50% of whatever the score is, it's normally a card I'm quite keen to test out and try and prove myself wrong. Because if you are wrong, great, you learned something. If you got it right, then who cares? You only spent a little bit of time figuring it out for sure. And
that's always a fun part for me too, is that no matter what a card reads like, you can't truly know what it feels like until you play it. And oftentimes you'll find stuff one way or the other. So we're just going to jump right into it. So we're going to start with Fire. And a card that absolutely lived up to the expectations I had for it is Amaterasu. I'm honestly amazed that anyone ever doubted this card, and I said that before the Opus, and I think that's been confirmed afterwards. I mean, you'll hear people talk about cards saying, oh, well, it would die to Amaterasu. You'll actually hear people rate a card based on how does it fare against Amaterasu, and I always expected that of it. So to me, the only surprise here is that anyone ever thought this card wasn't going to be good. Like, just reading the text, I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, it's completely kind of changed the game for Fire decks. I mean, not only did Fire decks get Tenzin to make samurais suddenly go from tier nothing to tier 1, it just gave it this completely, well, I don't want to say unique effect because Ishtola Opus 5 also does the same thing, but it's unique in the fact that they don't have to play onto the board first. It's just it's a threat that could be in their hand at any point as long as they got the CP for it, and it completely blow out the game for no reason. But at the same time, it's been interesting kind of trying to find the best decks that play around that, either through their most powerful entry abilities being on 9k forward, so at least they don't die to Amaterasu, or just don't have to worry too much about entries at all, given how popular they were on nearly every forward in some decks before Amaterasu came out.
Yeah, it was a beast. So since you brought him up, that's our next one is Tenzin, and we'll kind of throw the backup samurai in there too, but mainly Tenzin. And that this was a card for me, I thought it read great, so I thought, okay, this is going to be a pretty good samurai, but it was one that I didn't appreciate how good it was until I actually saw it in play, and that, when you bring this guy down, you've got this big, brave attacker every turn who then you can't counter swing because he's sitting there as a blocker, and they almost don't even care if you kill it because, okay, cool, now I'm gonna go revive Cyan, and he can fetch out Cyan, and just again, I thought he would be good. I didn't know he was gonna be as good as he was.
Yeah, Tenzin for me was really weird, because we used to live in a world of win war all the time where you go to 5 backups deliberately and then you have this card come down that is like slam it turn 1, it's best on turn 1 and it is on like any other turn of the game most of the time. Was like, yeah, I didn't really see that one coming. I didn't quite appreciate how much value you could get from just playing a card that, it starts at 6 and you think there's a hefty thing to play turn 1, but then as long as it lives to the end of the turn, you'd probably draw a card, and if there's a samurai in your break zone, he's at least a 2 CP 6k, it's going to keep getting value, got to be answered really quick. And I never really thought playing like 18 other samurais as kind of the minimum was going to be good in a deck, because samurai cards are just very average kind of, they're like good in limited but not in constructed. But then the pairing of Tenzin and Cyan was like, wow, I didn't see it coming. I thought Tenzin was great support, but that plus Amaterasu just completely revolutionized fire for the last set. It was amazing.
Yeah, samurais, they went on, used their Bushido and went all over the place. So kind of with the samurai mention, I want to mention Magista, because this was a card that I underrated when it first came out, because it's just not my play style. I was thinking, why would I ever want to like self-ping my own card? Isn't that a waste of a backup? Isn't that a waste of an Ifrit? Turns out, no, it's really not. And, you know, that was given a lot of prominence in samurai decks as well, or even on its own, that I didn't think this card would amount to a whole lot, and I was certainly wrong about that, because people proved it could be pretty brutal.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing with Tenzin, right? I evaluated the card thinking you weren't looking to just play it turn one, play a Blaze, and just have 2 forwards and a backup. And then when you think about it, you're like, well, 2 forwards and a backup. When the forward you get is Alphano, which always guarantees you a play for next turn, usually either Cyan or Irvine backup were generally the key ones. The thought of going Magista, Blaze, Alphano, and then getting an Irvine, it's like, if I don't kill the Magista right now, they're going to Irvine the Magista next turn, play a Cyan, get a Tenzin, and that Tenzin's going to be on curve on turn 3. And all of a sudden, not only am I dead, but they've played like perfectly on curve every turn for absolutely no reason. So yeah, the 3 of them together, Amaterasu, Tenzin, and Magista, ended up making this incredibly scary deck. And the thing that I always found most confusing was that when everyone kind of discovered how powerful samurais were with Magista, that there were some builds that still didn't opt to play Magista after that. And I think, you know, anyway, even nowadays, with like Palom coming out and Emperor Zand in this set, anyone who doesn't play Magista in their samurai deck has got to be a bit kind of crazy, to be honest.
That's awesome. So I have to mention my favorite summon from Final Fantasy is Bahamut, and we got this cool Bahamut forward card. And to be honest, he basically did what I expected him to be. You know, he was hardly top tier. I didn't think he was terrible. He was fun to use, and to me that was ultimately what was important, is that I enjoyed using him. And, you know, in theory, he's one that should only get better as we get more Bahamut summons, and that's just more special fodder for him. And he was fun to use when I got to use him, but, you know, he was just ultimately what I expected to be. But I just got to give a shout out because I was just still so happy to see that card.
Yeah, I like the card exists. I like they finally released a forward one. It always felt like one of those things that, yeah, Bahamut is a summon that the summoners cast in the games, but at the same time he's always like, he's more than that, right? He's always a character. So seeing him as a forward, even the FF10 one, which doesn't really have any kind of dialogue, that was just great to see. And I think in like a fairer game, you know, where you don't have things like Mist Dragon running about that can completely ruin the deck strategy, it could be a lot more viable. But as just as a fun card with potential to be a really good card, I thought Bahamut was a really cool addition, especially taking up like a rare slot in the set. You know, whenever you can build around a common or a rare, that's always nice, because it always leaves a lot of room for the heroes and legends, other cards to build around as well, because it just gives you more deck building versatility in a set.
Yeah. So the last fire card we're going to mention is Lonnie. And Lonnie is a card that I heard several people say that this is the best fire card in the set. And I was never there personally, because, don't get me wrong, there were some times she would pull something insane. And I remember once with her, I pulled my opponent's Amaterasu. It was like, cool, let me cancel your next thing for 1 CP. Felt ridiculous. But there were also times, I remember I was playing Chocobos and my opponent pulled a fat Chocobo that I already had down that they couldn't even use. I was like, yeah, thanks, and like it let me dig for my next card better because they just threw a dead card off my deck. So for me, I saw too many situations where Lonnie like went bust for me to declare she was the best card. But I think so many people loved that thief aspect of her, of I'm going to steal a card from your deck. So what did you think of Lonnie?
Yeah, I was like, at first I thought I was in the boat of she was like unusually good, and then when we played, I don't know, I played like most of the games I played in the early days of the set were against like Marsh Ritz, and one of my friends who I played with a lot played Lanny a lot, and he just always hit my good card. He always hit like a Gilgamesh and then played for 3 CP, you know, or something like, yeah, like you said, Amaterasu. And when that happens like 5 times in a row, you think, wow, this card's amazing. Yeah. And you play it yourself and you hit some like 3 CP backup that doesn't search anything in your deck, like a Bran or something, and then you think, wait, is this really that good? And it can be, and it's really cool with it was a nice proactive fire forward for Marsh Ritz to play after the Marsh Ritz with the CP the untapped. But apart from that, yeah, it just it's fair. overall. It's a gamble. It could high roll, it can low roll. It's a fine card in the end.
I've heard it's pretty crazy in a boss deck, like going against it, stealing those boss cards, so a little tip for people. Okay, so we're going to move on to Ice, and one card I was very excited to try was the Bard Olmia. And this card was a little disappointing for me. To be honest, I just never got to use her action abilities to, like, give something brave, haste, first strike, all those effects she could do. I kind of did appreciate her for the little anthem she created, but beyond that, she ultimately let me down a bit.
Yeah, I saw her in a couple of the Ice like turbo discard decks as like a cheap body that makes your other cheap discard bodies a bit bigger, so they're better at fights. But apart from that, I never saw her. Personally, didn't ever expect to see her either. Really.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, someone I wasn't really sure about was Emmitt Selk. This is the Opus XII version, and I played him quite a bit in my Ice decks, and I just don't know what to think about him. Like, at times, he felt pretty good, especially if you were on 5 damage and he gets that entry effect. That was very good, but again, you had to wait till you were 5 damage to get that off. And again, sometimes your opponents would just knock him out of the way to then go in for a victory. So, but there were other times, they had to pick him and then he would keep coming. So I don't know. I'm still not really sure what to think about this card.
Yeah, me neither. It's hard evaluating Ice last set because most of what came out from it didn't see play because Ice as an element wasn't particularly strong. Emmitt Selk feels like had he been in any other color, he would have seen a lot more play. So I don't think it's really an Emmitt Selk problem. It was more just an Ice problem. I too like the card. I think it's cool. I think more often than not, the blink effect is going to be more beneficial for you than it is for your opponent, and it's got the added risk of it's mandatory. So if they do have a Cactor on board, your Emmitt Selk is useless. But that's just one of those things in Final Fantasy. I think solid card, just wrong place at the wrong time.
That's fair, that's fair. So one card I really did like in Ice was one of the new summons they got, which was Carbuncle. And pretty often I was able to resolve 2 of its 3 effects because my opponent would have a low hand count, especially, playing Ice and playing discard cards. And it actually felt to me really good for really cheap. I got to freeze 2 things or dull something. I didn't use the power buff a whole lot, but still doing a double freeze, or a double freeze and a dull for just 2 CP, to me felt really good. So I actually liked him a lot more than I thought I would.
Yeah, I super rated Carbuncle really high in my review, and that was again before knowing Ice wasn't going to be great. The whole idea of it was like a Belias 4 mono Ice, which felt like something they needed, because Ice is one of those things that's identity. It doesn't really have much power buffs. It's all about you do damage and get through with dulling and freezing opponents forward. So the power buff on top of that was really nice. You play at Genesis, and you can't just put some 8k in the way, because then Genesis can keep swinging. If they got Carbuncle in hand, you just kind of lose the game. And again, if you get both effects off, because you've put a lot into blocking a Genesis or blocking whatever, they'll also freeze 2 of your backup. So in theory, great card for mono Ice. Just mono Ice just wasn't that kind of mono Ice that it wanted. It wasn't really a thing.
So one card I was 100% right about, come at me Chris Adams from the RVA, is the Emperor, which was the Ice Legend. I said this card sucked the moment I saw it, and he tried to convince me otherwise, and my buddy Brandon, and I saw people try to run so many decks with it, and it just never did anything. And I thought that when I read it, was like, this is just so complicated for what ultimately amounted to a discard. Like, all this work just to get a single discard, people running 8 copies of the Emperor to try to recur it all the time. Like, I don't know, I never saw it be successful. If someone, can show me times it was, I'll be happy to eat my words. But as far as I could tell, that card was the big letdown I thought it would be.
Yeah, it wasn't great, but even now in Opus 13, it's the only answer Mono Ice has to Neo Exdeath, really. It can't actually beat Neo Exdeath without just having Emperor to sack off every turn and revive to its end of turn ability. So, yeah, not great, but at least it gave the deck a bit of legs versus Neo. Yeah, that's all I can say for it as well.
That's fair. So our last Ice card is one that I absolutely loved, and I'm hoping will only get better in the future, and that was the Crystal Exarch. And, I built a deck around him, and he was just fun. How great was it? That I have no idea, but it was super fun to use. It was so enjoyable to put him down. Hey, here comes Genesis for free. Here comes Kuja for free. Here comes Dragon for free. And it created this state where your opponent's like, I have to get rid of this guy immediately. And I'm curious to try him now in Opus 13 with that new Charlotte card that came out, which is like a Protector Paladin to help keep him alive. So to me, he was the kind of card I wish mono decks would get more of that. You're really rewarded if you go into mono. So I loved that card a lot.
Yeah, he's cool in theory. I don't share the same enthusiasm for Exarch.
A lot of people didn't like him.
Yeah. But I've also, the most I've seen of Exarch is in the All-Star Cube draft, actually, and it's one of those cards in the All-Star draft that gets memed upon a lot, because in a limited format, he's really not very good. Yeah. And in constructed, again, specifically for Mono Ice, Mono Ice isn't very good, and I don't know, 4 CP7K to bring out a 4 or a 5 drop most likely is okay, it can snowball, you're right. I don't know, it's not quite up to par for this, for current year kind of thing.
That's fair. Okay, so let's move on to Wind. So we're going to start with the legend, which is Ashe, and she's still one that I didn't really rate her very highly, but I've seen her used a lot in Storm. But I also, as I watch Storm, I wonder how much is the Ashe actually doing, because it seems like often she'll draw the card, but other than that, she rarely attacks, she just kind of sits there. But you've played a ton of Storm, so how do you feel about Ashe?
I really enjoyed her at first. Later and later in the set, as the meta stabilized and we became more needing tech cards for certain matchup, she was always an easy card to cut because she doesn't do anything special. She's just she's an extender. Mm-hmm. She plays a body on the board, draws a card. Again, kind of a Crystal Exarch kind of card. If it doesn't kill her, she's going to gain more value over time. The body being hard to kill wasn't really a big deal. It was just the body being free and threatening more value that was good. Yeah. But in the end, Earthwind especially has quite few slots for forwards because it uses so many on summons and backups. So if it didn't need that, if Cryo didn't exist and we weren't playing 10 plus summons, then maybe you'd see a lot more of Ashe. But as it stands, it's hard to fit her in alongside all the other good stuff when we're already playing multi-element off colors like Lock.
Yeah, that's fair. So a card that I thought was going to be ridiculous, and I think it proved to be ridiculous, was Althea. When I saw this backup, I was like, are you kidding me? This can be searched off Nordstalin, and it gives you a CP back when it enters, and you just have this free ability to just bounce stuff. And I knew that was ridiculous, and a part I hadn't even appreciated was the protection it provided you. I remember an opponent used it to dodge a Bahamut 0 once, and I was just like, are you kidding? I can't even hit you with a summon because you're just going to bounce that person back to your hand? I wish this card didn't exist.
Yeah, card's ridiculously powerful. I underrated it slightly when it came out. I was like, it's 3 CP going to be a bit awkward, but the payoff for it is immense. There's nothing bad about it. I mean, Althea on Shantoto, to let you play Shantoto 5 times in a game sometimes, really powerful. Nowadays I have nothing bad to say about Althea. One of, at least, in every win deck, probably.
We saw that at the Legendary Wolf Games reunion tournament. I think Matthew Okimoto, he's running Storm, and I remember there was one match, he bounced Shantoto, I think, 4 times. Used Shantoto 4 times. 4 times? You're using Shantoto 4 times in a match? What have we come to? So, one that saw no play at all, but I'm going to give a shout out because I built a deck around it, and it was just it's just one of these fun cards, is the Dancer, the standard unit. And when I saw it, I was like, ooh, this could be fun. And so I just built a mono win deck with backup Dancers and the Rem that can tap itself to reactivate. And so I would do these just fun chain combo pings where Dancer would tap 4k to the board, Rem would tap her, reactivate her, she'd tap again, 4k to the board, Pinello in the back line. Yeah, it never saw any play, but man, did I have a fun time with that deck. So I just have to give a shout out to that card.
Yeah, it's a cool card. It's nice when standard units have a payoff, something to work towards. And that's a cool little effect, doing 4k, and then all the wind on top effects, being able to clear a board quite easily.
Yeah, it was fun board clear. So a card that I totally underrated was the White Mage backup, because I just thought, well, Wind already has so much activation, what are people going to use this for? Well, I didn't know an infinite loop was going to exist, so yeah, my opinion on this card has certainly changed, and I hate it.
Yeah, it's a shame that a card like that is only ever being used in an infinite loop deck, but yeah, we kind of got a new version of that, a similar version in the Pavlov this set, which is more a generic use. So it's kind of Pavlov's what White Mage probably wanted to be. But yeah, the Infinite Loop is cool, it's scary, and maybe not the most fun FFTCG game for your opponent, but for you,
I was gonna say, I don't know if cool is the word I would use, but to be fair, I never use it. I'm always on the receiving end of it, so I don't enjoy it very much. So it's kind of speaking of that infinite loop, we have the Chicories, and the Chicories are kind of like the Tyro of Opus 11 in that they weren't spoiled ahead of time. You know, they weren't revealed until the set was revealed, and the same was with Tyro. And we always have these cards that aren't in the actual spoilers and just get revealed when the set is, and you're like, oh, what are these cards? And the Chicories read kind of crazy, and then seeing them in action, man, these things were just a thorn in my side through this entire opus. A lot of people use them in the Infinite Loop, Hashmal or Paradise or whatever, and, you know, you've just got to be... They can just kill you from so many different angles. You got to make sure you have a forward that can even block them. They get their power buffs. They get backup reactivation, drawing cards for whatever reason. They have this big party attack. Like, these things were a terror. I hated fighting against these things, but there's no doubt they were great.
Yeah, it had I guess the misfortune of being this cool thing everyone wanted to try out at the start of the set. So when it was, you know, that's at the start of the set when everyone's trying to do their own thing. They're not like teching for matchups. So Chicories just run rampant on all these kind of new decks. And then people realize, wait, I'm getting annoyed being murdered in one turn by this mad combo. I'm going to start running tech for it. And all the tech for it was just kind of, you know, if the combo gets interrupted in some way, unless you have a spare Chicory on hand, like an Azura to get it back, you kind of just sit there for a turn and hope to draw another one next turn. Mm-hmm. And that kind of made it just fall out of popularity. But it's a really cool deck to just randomly take to an event here and there. And just like, because people aren't preparing for it as much nowadays, they're preparing for new things, and like, you know, Samurais and Neo X Death, they're not really paying attention to Chicory, and they come and donk you on the head, and you think, damn, I wish I was playing on my Chicory out still.
Yeah. So 2 new backups we got that I personally loved was the new Chocobo backup and Chocolate backup. So Chocobos is my girlfriend's favorite deck, and I build a lot around her, so it was cool to have something that fat Chocobo with a 5-cost ledge is like, oh, he can grab a backup now, and that felt great to put him down, bring in the Chocolate, and we always run No-No in her decks too, so she's always getting backup reactivation, so it was really enjoyable to, you know, like, oh, I'm going to get Chocolate, get a bunch of counters on, so I thought she was good, and a lot of people didn't think Chocolate would be very good. I thought she was pretty good, and I know you used her at least a lot to start. How'd you end up feeling about those cards?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I've always been a big fan. All throughout the set of Opus 12, I was a big fan of using Izana to search for her in Earthwind. I always thought Izana particularly was a great card because it was effectively a net 0 CP body on the board. Now they can find 2 different backups. I thought it was amazing to pair them 2 together, especially because Chocolate is something you always want down kind of early, because if you ever have that off turn where you can't use all your backups, at least you're banking like half a CP for later on. So Chocolate on her own is still good, but I thought particularly with Izana, any kind of Choco backup that was remotely playable, which both of these are, would be a great addition to the game, and I'm really glad they finally came along in Opus 12.
Yeah, absolutely. So our final guys for win, there was a lot of win standouts this set, is another Chocobo. We got Bartz and Boko. And it was really funny to see the meta of the set evolve, because kind of like Chicories, there was a time there everyone was playing Bartz and Boko. And it was really exciting to get these 2 guys down early. And once I got the dream turn, which is I got the Andoria backup down, Bartz and Boko out. So you've gone in, done 2 points of damage. You've got 3 bodies on the board, a backup, and 2 cards in hand still. It was like, so they were just so fun, so unique, and in theory they should only get better as the more 1 costs they print.
Yeah, this was one of those decks that, like, if fire wasn't so strong, then it probably would have reigned supreme for a long time. Like, this was so close, but Amaterasu and Blaze and all that kind of things kept us a little bit in line, turned it into that KFC. But overall, yeah, I thought the thing was cool. Sometimes you think, yeah, just going Bartz Boko turn 1 and winning the game off that's a bit degenerate. But the deck had a lot to it. It was very fluid. It could set up and kill you like turn 6. It could just go in straight away. It was unpredictable. I like that. I like that from a deck.
Yeah. So, moving into Earth, we're going to start with the Earth Legend, which is Kryl. Kryl is a card that I completely underrated. I was just like, I don't know, like, it gets removed from the game afterwards, and, like, using your opponent's summon, and you got to have the CP to play for it. I was just like, I was just very lukewarm on it. And at the end of the Opus, I was like, I'm sorry, Kryl, forgive me. I know not what I did. Please forgive me. Card's ridiculous, and particularly in the Storm deck, it was gross the amount of ways it just fed into everything that deck wants to do.
Yeah, man, I underrated this card as well, and that was really stupid. I know, busted any Kryl gamers. Like, card's amazing. I don't know, I don't think anyone really needs to explain why we just bowed down to mighty god Kryl.
Yeah, she's ridiculous. She is, yeah, she's just absurd. And she made Storm a powerhouse. So one card that unfortunately never saw play, and part of it is because they just don't have enough support, is the Noct for the Warriors of Darkness. But when I played him, he's really good, and he actually kind of has this like infinite loop you can do with Diana, where Noct gets chosen, you pull Diana back from the break zone, he goes to the break zone, you put the Diana out, you pull the Noct back, and legit, unless they have a way to interrupt that somehow, you can just constantly chain those two over and over again. He's a really cool card. It's just Warriors of Darkness needs more than, 4 characters, so...
Yeah, this should have been the legend that came out in Opus 8, I think was when they first came out. Like, if it had come out back then, the whole package would have been top tier, and it would have been fairly top tier. The other problem that Archetype has is that because of like lore reasons, Glaive is a very weird card in that it searches for Diana or Sol.
Yeah.
Like, hello? Why in the world would I want to search Sol in FFTCG with Glaive? So yeah, it's always, even nowadays it's a bit let down by that fact, and the new Glaive wasn't very good. But if you sort of go back in time, play Opus 8 meta, but swap the Nox around, I would be interested to see how Warriors of Darkness would fare in that meta with that change. I
would love to see that too. So a card that I had high hopes for, and I did ultimately like it, but I won't lie, I was a little disappointed, and that was Fenrir, the 5 CP summon. Now, at his best, I remember probably the best I ever felt with him was an opponent had Veritas on the field. I cast Fenrir, I broke Veritas, I broke their Tyro back up. That's just 11 CP I just chucked off their board, which felt really good. And there were other times I was able to, I'm going to break your Tyro, or I'll break your Star Sibyl and pull back, Kryl or some other 2CP. He felt really good, but there were also times he just felt really clunky, and I felt like I could only get one of his effects off, which to me wasn't ever really worth it. I always wanted to try to get 2. So while I did still like him and I love the art on that card, ultimately he wasn't quite as good as I was hoping he would be.
Yeah, he got two more big targets this set in Sophie and Sarah Mobius, so we might see more of Fenrir, just because the main reason was that the only real proactive effect on him was to bring back a 2-drop, and the only good generic purpose ones last set were Shadowlord and Kryl. And a lot of the time with Kryl, if you Fenrir Kryl in, you don't have any CP to use her ability left off your backups, and if you cast it off Kryl, then you need another target to bring back as a 2CP. So it just ended up being a very awkward card. If instead of that monster removal part, it had some kind of other proactive text, even if it said something like draw 1 card, it would probably be a whole lot better. Something a bit like Mist Dragon. But maybe we see it a bit more. It's I'm not convinced it's going to really ever see high tier competitive play, which is a shame because it looks really cool.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get him. So ending on Earth, my favorite card in Earth, and a card that I thought was going to be cool, but this one blew me away, and that was the new Shadowlord. Man, oh man, did I love using this card. This is a card I didn't have an issue slamming down turn 1, and by turn 1 I mean turn 2, like if I'm the turn 2 player, my first turn, because it was so easy to read his, I almost never got burned by his entry effect that your opponent gets to play a backup. I think one time out of over 40 times I played this card, because it was actually really easy to find. First of all, if they had full backups, they weren't going to do that. Second of all, when you did it early, again, on their turn 1, if they had any 2-cost backups, they would have put them down. So if they don't put any down, they don't have any in hand. Plop them down, boom. And then suddenly you've got this guy who for 1 Earth CP can be brave. And oh my goodness, Alex, he did something which I just loved, which is, your Tyros? Oh, is that a Kusith? Oh, is that a Gobranth? Guess what? It doesn't work. Oh, felt so good to shut off those EX bursts. What did you think of Shadowlord?
Well, first off, you just had a cool little Disney villain moment there, Travis. That was a bit crazy. Seeing your whole new light now. But Yeah, I saw the card way too black and white at first. I was like, well, if they have a 2CP, it's bad. If they don't, well, it's cool. It's just a little body, whatever. But it ended up, yeah, as you say, you can make a hard read on it. And I also, when I was putting it in some of my Earth Wind decks towards when the meta had kind of settled, I looked at like Water Lightning, for example, and the Water Lightning lists that have become popular played like 4 2CP backups out of like 15 to 17. And then I saw that, and then I compared, same with like Neo X Death, which didn't play any backups really, and Samurais, which didn't like actively look for 2CP backups in its opening hand. Suddenly it became a very kind of good meta tech. Whether it remains to keep doing that, we don't know, but with so many 4CP backup that searches backups coming out like Sarah in this set, even then Shadowlord's still probably going to be good, just because the density of 2CPs is a lot lower than it was 3-4 opuses ago.
Yeah, and he's an 11 character, so just more targets for, Star Sybil and all that.
Yeah.
So moving on to Lightning, a card that I didn't use myself a lot, but I saw a lot of people use to great effect, and that was the new Alba. And I rated this one pretty well, but I think it really exceeded that, just because break zone removal right now especially is so nice because recursion is very prevalent. So oftentimes that card would come down, hey, that summon, that's gone, and now I'm going in and I'm going to remove a character. So she really was this nice little threat that, as the opponent, I often wanted to get rid of her because I was like, I don't want her dumping out my break zone. So yeah, she was pretty good.
I used her a fair bit, and there were some times where she just feels like a better Illua, just because that 1 CP difference is a big deal. Just being able to put, like, there were some games as well I just remember having as myself or against Lightning decks where it's like, if they just do their turn and pass, it's fine. But when they do their turn and then plop an Alba on top as a kind of free bonus and put the damage in, if I'm not answering the Alba immediately, the Alba is representing 2 damage, maybe even more than that. So suddenly that Alba allows the Lightning player to put even more of a clock than it's normally able to, and it just became very scary. Yeah, it's kind of a shame really that the best Warrior of Darkness to kind of come out ends up being one that doesn't really support Warrior of Darkness at all. It's just this generic 2CP girl, but great card. I think she'll continue to see play.
Absolutely. So a pair of cards that I very much underrated was Sid and Mid Previa. I thought the Sid Previa was pretty solid, but I don't know. I guess I just didn't read Mid correctly, or I just didn't see the combo, because just reading I was like, I don't know, that doesn't seem that great. But then seeing it in like the Lightning Water Party deck, and that instant Sid's going to give something haste, Mid brings him back for free, something's going in, bam, you're zapping something for 8. I was like, whoa, I totally underestimated those.
Yeah, I didn't put two and two together with these guys at first, especially with Water Lightning. I didn't really think of just, the ability to go Syldra and find these two together immediately. I thought it was a bit too awkward, because I was like, okay, we got Diana to search Sid, and that's great, but then how many good targets are there for Mid? And I looked through, and like the only playable ones are like Kate Sith and Sid Previa, and I'm like, is that really going to make it into a deck? And then with Syldra, damn right is going to make it into a deck, because that Mid Previa is an absolute nightmare. And when you pair it in Water Lightning with stuff like the new Legend Yuna, out of nowhere you can have no board, and all of a sudden you're just, killing 2 forwards, doing 2 points of damage, and the opponent's like, what? How do I recover from this without something like a Shantoto? It's crazy. Yeah,
my friend Brandon played that a lot, and just like you said, there'd be times he'd have an empty board, and then suddenly he's got 5 forwards on there. I'm like, wait, what happened? How did that happen? Yeah, they were great. So a card that I didn't underrate, I think this card is as strong as I said it would be. However, I was surprised it didn't see as much play as I thought it would, and that is Greg, or perhaps more appropriately, Gilgamesh. I mean, the card's great, right? It's everything about it reads fantastic. I was just surprised I didn't see it nearly as much as I thought I would.
Yeah, I feel like I maybe underrated it, but for the reasons you're saying, maybe I didn't. Like, it's again one of those cards that maybe in any other element would have just been an insane kind of pickup, whereas in Lightning it felt like a good pickup, but outside of like stuff with like Regis, it wasn't really like abusable, but still that was really cool to be able to just have it on board, sack it, play Regis, bring it back, do something like that. And it just there were a lot of games I played against Lightning decks where they would just have a board, they'd be like, okay, I can deal with this board, but then they play a Gilgamesh, I'm like, can't deal with this board and a Gilgamesh, and it just became that kind of that straw that broke the camel's back sometimes. Yeah. It was just a very powerful throw on its own, just play it onto the board, nothing's really just going to be able to kill it. So you kind of got to play forwards into it that end up going to die, and he never really didn't get a value, which is really good. He was the legend, and he ended up being a good solid offering, and probably the best all-purpose Gilgamesh we've seen in the history of the card game.
That's true. Hey, I'm noticing I've underrated a lot of this because our next two were the 2 Dragoons. And to be fair, I rated the forward Dragoon decently well, but I think he actually exceeded my expectations that he gave Dragoons, these Dragoon decks that want to just crap out a bunch of forwards and don't even have summons, he gave them a really great on-entry trigger. Like, he was one of the few answers I have in that deck to deal with Neo X Death. And I 100% underrated the backup Dragoon. I don't know why. I was just like, oh, I don't know, is that good? But in reality, first of all, you can tap it to get back anything you want, but I really undervalued how much that deck would benefit from just having a backup that was a Dragoon. Like, the Freyas, the Dragoon that gets cheaper. Like, there were so many things that suddenly opened up that they had never been able to do. Cherry Blossom. Cherry Blossom was a myth before this, because who wants to have to get 10 forwards out to do this big... No, well, you've got a whole backup line of Dragoons. Now Freya on her own can do this 8k board wipe. Like, wow, these cards are great.
Yeah, it was a big deal for Dragoon to get the backup in particular, especially like not on a named guy, on a multiplayer one. So you could have multiple down, as you say, for the Freya S, and also you could crack it to get back a Freya for the Freya special ability. Yeah, it's like one of those things. People always say, Dragoons are always one Dragoon away from being like top tier deck. And every time it doesn't happen, they fall back a bit, and then when they do get something good, they creep up a bit more. And it's a solid deck, and because of that Dragoon backup, I think in particular, the archetype is now kind of settled, and it will be, I think, like a solid tier 2 or better deck forever, just because haste and being obnoxious, playing all these Dragoons at once and smacking your opponent is just a solid strategy. Yeah,
really increased the value of Alice too, which was nice.
Yes,
so our final lightning card, this one I overrated, is the new Odin. I thought we were going to see Odin decks, lightning decks with Odins, and I saw one here and there, but I don't know if that just deck wasn't popular. Maybe there's nothing wrong with this Odin, or again, maybe, I don't know, it was too much work to get his cost down, but I thought he would be really popular, and I never saw him.
Same thing as you. I rated him very highly. I didn't know, it was one of those cards I rated highly. I didn't know how much we were going to see of him, but I was like, this is the Odin support we need. This is the Odin support that lightning legend needed. And like the card's done nothing wrong. Card's been nothing but good. Again, it's another kind of weak to Mist Dragon kind of strategy and kind of Kadaj and removal in general. But I still think it's got hope. I still think if an Odin deck is a thing, that's going to be a key part of it. So it's just the time for Odin deck needs to come around, and we'll see it, top of the list.
Yeah, so we'll move to water. I'll just briefly mention Altros in that. While I never used that Altros for his effect, it was just nice to have more fodder in the break zone for the Altros. That was cool. But I want to really just move on to Syldra, which was a summon some people underrated, but I thought from the beginning was great, and people proved how great it was. Not just water, all these 5 characters it could grab, like you mentioned, Sid Previa, Mid Previa, Neo X Death, Lena, everything. Syldra was fantastic.
Yeah, another one I super underestimated. I was like, well, even with, not with Yuna, but yeah, in general, do I want to pay 4 CP to get 2 cards of my choice and lose 2 CP effectively because we lose the Syldra? Turns out, yes, you do. Yeah. And that's as far as it goes.
That's one of those cards that if you drew perfectly, you would never need it, but you're never going to draw perfectly, and it helps you fix that. So, okay, so one card that I had high hopes for, but at least for me was disappointing, was the Strago. And honestly, I don't think it's because he's bad. I think it's because he's just so situational, and just the amount of times that beneficial situation came up where it's like, Strago comes in, bounce that, now I'm going to play this awesome thing off of that. Like, for me, it was just too hard to get my CP to line up with what they had so I could do Strago's effect, which is a shame because I thought he was really cool.
Yeah, another high roll type of card. I mean, I will say about Strago that he is one of the best, if not the best, water card in the All-Star draft in Limited. If you want to use Strago to good effect, go to Cube and play water cards. But in Constructed, you're right, it's just hard to make the CP line up. A lot of the cards you wanted to bounce as well, you didn't want to bounce, like you wanted to break them. Like bouncing a Tenzin and then bringing in some cool 6-drop is great, like a Gilgamesh 11 or something like that. But then they've still gotten value out of the Tenzin being on the field for a turn, and Tenzin still gets his effect when he leaves the field. I think if Tenzin didn't get his effect when he left the field, and only when he entered the break zone, maybe we see more of Strago for purely that reason. Yeah. But it just didn't quite match up to expectation. You're right.
That's fair. And another one for me that was a bit of a letdown was Knights, and in particular Beatrix. I don't know what it was, because everything on this card reads well, but Don't get me wrong, she was helpful. You know, she was useful, she was a 2CP, she could come in off of Phoenix, she could come in off of Puck. I saw a lot of people use her in a 9 deck, but I don't know if Knights just needs something else. Maybe it's not her fault, but I expected her to boost it a lot more than it did, so maybe I overrated her there.
I don't think you did. I think she was, I don't know, like Knights wasn't really a playable archetype before this set of water-fire support before last set. And I think, yeah, it may have not ended up tier 1, but it was a deck that could give you a run for your money. And sometimes that's the best they can do. Like, not only really 3 decks can ever really be tier 1. And I think Fire Water with the rain stuff, you know, buffing your board, using rain special to give it haste, Layla Viking, Cloud Darkness Yuna. It was a good strategy and played to the strengths of Fire Water and really the best they could get. It just fell a bit short of being tier 1. You know, I think it was a good deck. I'm pleased with how the Beatrix worked.
Fair enough. So one that I underrated kind of because... So the very first card I think we ever saw for Opus 12 was Yuna, which was our box topper legend. And at the time, I didn't think she was very exciting because we didn't know this set was going to have all these party mechanics. You know, she was the first thing. Party mechanics, we're like, oh, the party mechanics aren't good. Man, this Yuna was crazy. Like you said, I wasn't ever expecting to see her in, of course, Bart's Boko, the Sid Mid Previa, and she was this crazy card that if you got her draw, she'd already paid for herself. She was good. But then she had this threat of, I'm going to party with anybody, and unless you stop me, I'm going to take out one of your forwards every turn. Like, she was fantastic.
Yeah, we spoke a bit on this on the last episode I was on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when we were talking about how 2CB Yuna was so good because it just didn't have any competition. And now you got this one that's generic, very good competition. You're like, yeah, man, this is what they can do with Yunas, and that's what competes for that Yuna slot now. And yeah, I think that card's going to be a card you look at every time you're playing Water in every set for a long time.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll give a final shout out for Water, which is Lunafreya, because I love the Category 15 deck. I've loved it since Opus 8, and it was fun in Opus 11 with Earth Lightning. And I was like, oh, but she's Water. How do I jam Water in there? Well, hey, Tyro exists, so... got her in there, and man, she is just fun to use because she just gives it this extra threat of, especially when you have Ignis. And it's like, yeah, they're all brave, they're all going to attack, and now I'm going to remove one of your guys. And I would use it to dodge my opponent's abilities. But target that active forward, well, I'm just going to dull it, so that's too bad. I saw Kyle Peters using a version of this too with Tama, and he would like Tama in the Lunafreya on their turn and have these surprise effects. Like, she was way better than I thought she was going to be originally.
Yeah, Lunafreya actually liked her a lot in Golbez's deck.
Nice.
I made with not Opus 15, with FF15, because you can bring in Lunafreya, Glauca, and then either Noctis or
nice.
Core, and that gives you 3 immediately from that. So I think even, you know, it's not going to be again not a top tier strategy, but if we get another FF15 character in a different element as a 2CP, Golbez gets cracked, and then Lunafreya is basically live the moment she comes in, and that was a lot of fun. It was good deck.
That's awesome. Okay, so we're going to move on to our final stuff, which is Light and Dark and the big multi-elements. Start with Light and Dark first. Lena, great light card. I wasn't sure when I read her. I was like, oh, is she going to be too slow? Like, how much are you really going to be able to reload her counters? But seeing her in practice, and I think it helped too that her job was Warrior of Light, it was so nice to see a light card that was strong, because sometimes, you know, light, or often light always gets crapped on in favor of dark. But yeah, Lena actually really surprised me. I totally underrated her.
Yeah, Lena actually might be my favorite card this set. It's a card I was like building around. I think a lot of other people underrated. They're like, oh, she's too slow. But it's one of those cards where, yeah, she's slow, but that payoff is kind of unparalleled. And the fact that she can keep getting counters, be it continuous around the board. And the biggest deal was being able to do it during an opponent's turn. Yeah. That was huge. Being able to bring in an Ishtola to cancel something, big auto ability on the stack, bring in a Cryo. You know, there's some mad situation where you could have a Tyro active. You could, on your opponent's turn against a fire deck, they go to swing with Cyan. You go Lena, bring out Cryo, target their Amaterasu to use on their Cyan. There's so many cool possibilities with Lena that I'm really glad they didn't release just another like generic kind of powerful light and dark card this set and went for Spirits and Materia, so Lena gets even more time to quite literally shine.
Yeah, I agree. No, that was a great little setup you mentioned there. So the opposite of all that complexity and intricacy that Lena brings is the absolute unfun that Neo Exdeath brings. And, okay, anyone who thought this card, because there was some people that said, oh, this won't be so big, this won't be a big deal. What were you thinking? Like, this was one of those cards I could just read. It was like, who designed this? Like, this is insane. And it was absolutely everything I thought it would be. Yes, If you happen to have an early answer, you could immediately punish them and say, hey, look at that, it's not a big deal. But guess what, when you didn't have the early answer? I played this against a buddy once, he spent the next 5 turns discarding cards because he had nothing. The card was just as cancerous and unfun to play against as anyone thought. It does, yes. And again, it just created this, it didn't create an interesting game for either player because it was legit. Hey, do you have an answer? Okay, we can play normally. You don't? Okay, the game's over. Was that fun for anyone? Did anyone have fun? I didn't. What do you think?
Sad.
Folks, that says it all. That's your 2018 World Champion. This card just makes him sad. Moving on. Let's get to some more interesting stuff. Celtius, our Fire Ice multi-legend. I didn't see anybody play Fire Ice, and this guy, I tried him once, Alex. I played him in a single game, and the first time, the only card I revealed was another Celtius, so that whiffed. And then the second time I tried it, it was like a card that I already had on the field. So I didn't even get to use his effect both times. And I was like, well, I hate this card. I threw it away. It seemed like nobody even gave this guy a shot.
Yeah, looking at it, he's actually just underpowered. Should have been at 8k. Should have had another line of text. Considering, you know, the rest of the dual elements we're going to be taking a look at, for a legend quality, Celtius just didn't hit the mark.
Yeah. Now, someone who did hit the mark, he hit it so hard, in fact, he got his buddy banned, and that's Barrel Eye. This was a card I think we all, when we read it, were like, well, this is nonsense. Like, what kind of effects are these? And the funny thing is, this was a card that, like, its power was here, and then it's here. So, like, his nonsense was already this crazy level, but people were immediately thinking of Guido, and that whole... I mean, even without Guido... using this thing with Pandemonium or a no-no reactivation or Zidane coming down. Hey, discard that. Now I'm going to Dull Freeze one of your guys. Nutty card, and obviously powerful because he got one of the cards banned because he had this infinite damage loop. Like, Barrel Eye was the beast I thought he would be.
Yeah, I mean, he was a beast because of Guido. Now that Guido is gone, you don't have the infinite with him. I don't know if he's going to see much play. He was kind of cool. It was kind of interesting to see a character like Barrel Eye become kind of like a... not a meta staple, but relevant in such a kind of weird strategy, you know, out of Nuge and Gippal and Barrel Eye. You don't really expect to see any of them be making waves. So from that point of view, it was kind of amusing. But yeah, I wonder if we'll see much more from him. Yeah. Now that Guido's gone and we've got like the new Hope in Opus 13.
Yeah. So a card I underrated a little bit, and I don't know why, but I guess I just couldn't see it yet, was Locke. And Locke is a terror, and Locke is way more brutal than I thought it would be, and I didn't truly appreciate how absurd it was when it comes down for 2 CP, and then they bounce it back with Althea, and they do it again. And I think one of the things that really helped Locke was that it had 2 basically neutral modes that you always wanted to use. As a matter of fact, I almost always saw people use the ice effects. On occasion, I'd see the wind break a 6 cost, and then the monster thing was just there just in case, but Locke was brutal. I know you played with it a lot, you saw it a lot.
I mean, this card is so good. Honestly, like, if they had printed it at 8 CP, I would believe it, you know. Like, it could have just not had the cost reduction, just been 8 CP, and it would have still been a worthy legend. It might have not been seen as much play, but I mean, if it had been like just an ice card or just a wind card at 8 CP, then I think it would have seen play. The fact that it can be 2 CP, to this day, I'm not quite sure what happened, what they were thinking when they did that, the testing that went to this card, but I'm happy because at the same time, Locke is a reward that doesn't feel like imbalanced. I think I honestly think now he's like the perfect kind of win condition, the perfect thing to aim for, and he's just a lot of fun to play with, you know.
Awesome. So one that was interesting to me is, I don't know if I underrated this card because I think it ultimately did what I thought it would do, and that's Iris. And, you know, I was disappointed I couldn't really fit her into the 15 package because she was win, but it seemed like, I don't know if I ever even saw someone use her action ability. It seemed like she was legit a free card you used to build up the cast counter to get Locke's power down. You used her a lot and saw her a lot. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like Wind Earth is a control deck, and playing forwards for 0 CP in control decks that can get even chunkier is a pretty big deal. So she had the dual benefit of you know, upping your lock count and just being a big body that you play for tempo. You know, Bartz and Vart are already very good cards in mono wind, so putting a version of these in Earth Wind, it was a bit questionable at first, like, were we going to be able to consistently have 2 of each color of backup? And then once the list kind of got sorted out and it's like, yes we can, then this card's bonkers. Yeah.
Yeah. And a card I was 100% right about was the new Ishtola. You know, some people thought when this first came out, well, is this going to overtake the Opus 5 Legend, though? That one's so good. This card was a pain in the neck to deal with. Had haste, couldn't be blocked by... I mean, basically, anything that could block it couldn't outpower her anyway. You couldn't even stack damage on her because she had this Minwu effect. I know I've read 100 times people say a card that without an ETB needs this much text to see play. I disagree with that. I think you could have easily taken off one of those effects and she still would have been great. To me, this card was a huge pain in the ass. What'd you think of Ishtola?
Yeah, she was the one, again, very polarizing at the start. Like, it's... I don't think it was even take away the text and is she still seeing play. It's taking away lines of text and is she good enough compared to the Opus 5 version? Because, like, we saw that card and we're like, if they're going to release another Wind Ishtola, it's got to be that card and or better. And it ended up being... It's a weird one that you can play either version in Earthwind. If this one gives you more meat, gives you more kind of ability to close out games, which is very important sometimes. Yeah, I still wonder if we'd had a real competitive season, which one would have actually seen more play towards the end of it. But I still think this was a very good card, and I still expected to see play in a lot of places for a while. Yeah.
So one that, again, I was pretty much dead on what I thought it would do was Regis. And I maybe didn't see him quite as much as I had hoped I would, but he was very fun and very brutal in some of the decks he was in. He brought back the 8 CP Kefka from Opus 4. That made a resurgence I'd never expected to see, and Regis just made him seem unfair. And I know I saw Sasha Stark once using the Final Fantasy VII deck with like the Birthing Pod Cloud, sacking off guys. Here comes Regis, he brings them all back. Suddenly you have this board of like 8 forwards out of nowhere. Like he was, but that's also kind of what I expected him to do. So Regis was great, and he basically did what I thought he would.
Yeah, same sort of thing. Very cool, very fun card. I thought he was going to take control of the game a lot more. Amaterasu is the main thing that I had things to say about Regis. Big difference between him and like Locke, for example, as far as win conditions go, was actually that from a competitive point of view. But yeah, for the rest of it, just a very cool, fun card to build around.
And I'll end with, this is our last one, and this is my absolute favorite card from the set, and it is Ferris. I played Warriors of Light since Opus 10. I love the Light Refia, and so to have another card that just paid off all of those, it said anybody who enters, you have this offensive option and you have this defensive option. You can just blow their board apart. Man, to have Ferris into the light wall, all the light wall dies, he brings back Dusk, Ferris triggers, now pay Dusk does this triggers, all the new ones too, Soul Aegis. Like, I had a blast with this card, and I just used it in pure Warriors of Light. I saw a lot of deck lists where people would use Ferris with Bartz, with Kryl, with Lena, because they all had Job Warrior of Light, so they could do combinations with that. Man, I love this card.
Yeah, it definitely gave Warriors of Light a boost to make it more... Like, it was always kind of a meme deck before this support in Opus 12, and Ferris definitely helped with that. We got so many like different builds of it as well, which was nice. You know, there was pure Fire Water, there was Fire Water Earth. To be honest, I feel like the one that became most popular towards the end of the set came out of Japan. It was Fire Water Earth Wind. It was using the whole thing, the whole rainbow of Warrior of Light, and that was really cool to see one that uses all 4 of those main elements. See some kind of competitive success and, you know, work, you know, not be a kind of awkward, oh, I have this CP and this CP and I can't play this card, but it actually ended up quite smooth. So yeah, Ferris, very cool card.
Folks, that was Opus 12. If you saw my Opus ranking videos, this is my second favorite Opus of the last 5 that I've been a part of. It's only really been topped by Opus 10. I had a great time, and there was some absolutely bonkers stuff in this set, but for me, I really appreciated the variety. I mean, look at even the little meta we had. You know, Chicories were huge, Bartz and Boko were huge, Samurais, Neo X Death, Storm. Compared to Opus 11, where it was just BFA, March Ritz, Kadaj everywhere, it was so nice to see so many different things being tried out, and to see so many things be popular and powerful, party attacks getting a boost, the multi-elements definitely shook up the scene. I had a great time with this Opus. Alex, what were your closing thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, pretend Neo X Death doesn't exist, and this is one of the best Opus we've had in a long time, you know. Opus 11 kind of saw Wind Water get knocked off his pedestal with Marsh Ritz coming in, and this one went and changed the whole thing all over again with bringing in the Samurais and the resurgence in Earth Wind and bringing all this support to these tier 2, tier 3 archetypes that really needed it. So we got to the end of it, and while Samurais and Earthwind were definitely very tier 1, everything else in the kind of tier 2 felt like it had a good shot, which made for a good diverse meta game, and I think a lot of people had a lot of fun with their favorite archetypes.
Absolutely. Alex, thank you so much for joining me for this. Folks, I'll put Alex's links in the description below where you can find him on Twitch. He posts on the NA page, the European page as well. He recently wrote up his own set review for Opus 13. Go ahead and check those out. I'm doing set review videos with Miss Cydia Gaming, so check those out on his channel. And so happy to have you here, sir. Can't wait to work with you again. Enjoy. Absolutely. Let us know what you thought of Opus 12. Tell me, what cards did you completely overrate and then they were duds, or the other that you totally underrated and then they surprised you? We always love to hear that. So take care, and we'll see you next time.